BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're going to be talking all about Stefan Molyneux, the YouTuber, the host of Free Domain Radio, author, as well as many other things. Now, the dedicated BBOR listeners will know that this segment is Genius or Fraud, where we try to look at somebody's standpoints and determine, is this person 100% truthful, or is there something else going on? And for the first time, we have a part 2. Last year, over the summer in 2019, we did an upload on Stefan Molyneux for Genius or Fraud, but I found that I was listening to his show a lot more over the last 7 months, so it's a good opportunity to do a second part. Now, there was a line that I thought I had said in the first one, but I was just listening back to that upload prior to this recording, and it turns out I had omitted it. And that was, in 2018, I started listening to a lot of Stefan's videos because I like to listen to audio when I go to sleep. And I had a playlist of Stefan Molyneux YouTube videos and, also the suggested ones on the side. When I'm going to sleep, the computer's right next to bed. I just would click the next one. And I saw that he talked about an enormous amount of subjects. The flat earth theory, UFOs, evolution, young earth creationism, Aristotle, countless videos. And I would always play one of those. But it wasn't until 2019, the summer of 2019, that is, that I had learned that he also does segments about giving people relationship advice or just asking somebody to tell their life story. What I guess I've kind of gathered is his show and his YouTube videos are any subject, on any subject, anything is fair game. He's just coming at it from the standpoint of, let's talk about the philosophical components associated with this. And he's also written many books on many different subjects as well. Okay, though, even if you are unfamiliar with Stefan Molyneux's YouTube videos and you've never even heard his name before, please stay tuned, because maybe you have heard of him as the guy who is very much opposed to spanking. I mean, he is a very big advocate for that. He views spanking as a form of child abuse. And a big thing to say about that is, I've noticed after listening to a lot of his segments, a lot of his YouTube videos, and as well as reading some of the printed material that he has put out, he is on the side of children. He's really talking about how a lot of things that are done to children should be viewed as abuse, not only spanking, because I was thinking that's not the heart of the issue. It's actually very comforting to hear that he also talks about how he doesn't yell at his daughter. He doesn't even raise his voice to his daughter, because those things can also be much more traumatic. I gotta tell you, I was spanked as a kid, but the emotional forms of abuse, I thought, left a much more traumatic impression. We're talking about things like shaming, embarrassment, as well as just things that are very simple, such as shouting and screaming. I really thought that left a much more traumatic effect on me. But what is the whole point of all this? Well, Stefan Molyneux gets caught up with some other things called defooing, disassociating from the family of origin. He has been called an online cult leader. He has been called a white nationalist, someone promoting MGTOW. But as far as the white nationalist and MGTOW accusations go, MGTOW meaning men going their own way, I'm not even going to talk about those things right now, because I don't think those claims are really too relevant. I think it's much more to focus on this thing about telling people to disassociate from their families of origin, saying that some people should leave their families if they have been victims of abuse, under the concept of, if you are continuing to love someone who has abused you, then you are just going to repeat the cycle of abuse. You will never get free from abuse if you're going to continue to love people like your parents, who spanked you as a child, as well as also using things like emotional shaming and public embarrassment and things of that nature. You're always going to be attracted to a partner who's going to have these characteristics of your parents, and those characteristics will be abusive. Well, you can see the title here. You're pretty sure that we're going to get to something. And what I began to think about was, Stefan Molyneux went through some bad things, right, growing up. He talks about it on his show. He is a man and I'm sure even if you aren't familiar with who he is, you could imagine this. Someone who went through some bad experiences growing up, and he wanted to fight back against this. And I was thinking, I got this guy figured out. He's Peter Pan, and his followers on Free Domain Radio are the Lost Boys. I have never found anyone more like Peter Pan in the world. And he created this whole thing to tell his mother, no, I was right. Talking about all these things, you shouldn't spank your kids, you shouldn't yell at your kids. Looking back to those moments in time when he went through something. And if you think about Peter Pan, Neverland, who are the villains? Captain Hook and the pirates, the adults, as well as not only are they adults, they're also criminals. They're wicked, they're menacing, and pirates just go different places destroying things. And the person who is in the role of Peter Pan, like Stefan Molyneux and his Lost Boy followers, are all getting together in this chance of youth and possibility, as well as, never mind that it is motherless. There's also another thing. But then I began to think, well, not only did I begin to think about it, like I said, I listen to his show somewhat regularly now. And once you hear some of the things that he would talk about, like his mother taking him by the head, smashing his head into a metal door repeatedly as a kid, to the point where he was beaten within an inch of his life. Then I began to think about some of those things that I had, originally thought. And I was like, no matter what, my heart just goes out, to somebody like him, no matter where he is now. Just even when you think about a kid being beaten like that, so heinously, so savagely, you're just like, oh my gosh, I am just so sorry to hear that. And we do get that a lot when you're talking about people in the true crime world, especially when you're examining the lives of serial killers, mass shooters. I mean, no matter what someone does, when you hear those stories about when they're like 4 or 5 years old, even 6 or 7 or something, and then they're just being beaten savagely by someone, especially someone that's supposed to be keeping them safe, such as a parent, you just begin to think, that is so tragic. I am just so sorry to hear that. So I began to retract a lot of the things that I said about that whole Peter Pan syndrome line, and just that whole thing. He created this thing called Free Domain Radio as a way to tell his mom, no, Mom, I was right. You could perhaps view that as an influence, but I think that the actual reality of the situation is much more serious, that there are real cases of abuse going on. And I would say, though, if we're going to look at the line genius or fraud, I don't really think that that's a very fraudulent thing to say, talking about breaking the cycle of abuse. I will tell you flat out, I'd be very curious what anybody would think about this in the comments section below. I don't think you have to stay with your family members solely because they're your family members. I mean, some people are more successful in life when they disassociate from their family members. I definitely think that that's a possibility. This whole blood is thicker than water thing, I've never been a subscriber to that. It's like, yes, you're related to them, but you choose what role they have in your life. So that's one thing to say about that. I'd be curious what anybody has to say in the comments section below. The next thing to say, though, is I read his book, Real-Time Relationships, which is just as like it says, it talks about the mechanics of relationships and how some of them function. Now about that one, the first 70 pages are commentary on what it's like being in a functional relationship and a dysfunctional relationship. The first 70 pages. Then there's just this inserted thing about the existence of God and religion, and then there's just some transcripts from his radio show, like they transcribed the audio from his Free Domain Radio show, and I'm like, this is 70 pages, like it's like a long essay with lots of filler attached to it. In the terms of genius or fraud, that is definitely something fraudulent. Loading your books with filler, I never like that. But something to say about that, though, when we did our upload on Dwight York, I believe it was called Disgusting Cult Leaders, because when you want to talk about somebody like that, one of the things in the news coverage around the arrest of Dwight York that came out was, a cult leader often writes many books. Always be aware of this. A cult leader often has many publications. They're often going to have 15 different books that you can get for free. I was praising people for giving away free books in the past, but you actually do learn. This is something that cult leaders do. It's to show that they have written a lot of books, so they must be smart if they've written many different books. And the second thing to say about that is, it also gives people many different things to choose from. It's like, I don't want to read this book about this subject. I want to read this book about that subject, and I want to learn more about what this person has to say. It's a way to lure people in, and it's also a way to appear that this person is very intelligent. Do I actually think Stefan Molyneux was a cult leader? No, because he doesn't discredit all the ways of the past. Because the three things that cult leaders mainly do, they discredit the ways of the past, they produce a new way, and then they tell you that something in your life is missing, and the only way to get it is by following the new way that they've created. But when you actually listen to Stefan Molyneux's show, like I said, I listen rather frequently. I haven't heard everything he's had to say, so maybe some things will stand out. Like I said, in the past, I thought maybe I had a good understanding of his worldview. Then it turns out maybe I didn't. But it's like, he supports an enormous amount of historical figures. He supports an enormous amount of traditional thought. He supports an enormous amount of the ways of the past. The reason why people call him a cult leader is because he's talked about disassociating from parents. While I said, I don't think that is an extreme statement. I don't think that should be completely off the table. Some people perhaps should. And people have called into his show before and even said that their therapist recommended not talking to their parents. That's not like forbidden territory. It's more about, so I don't think he is a cult leader just because of that, but one of the things with that one is, I heard one call-in segment, and I don't remember the title of the episode or else I would cite it, but he is just getting into an argument with the person, telling him, no, why on earth would you ever talk to your mother and father again? Why would you ever see them again? Just really trying to persuade this person just to end the relationships with their parents when they did not want to. So that is something that is a little bit, it's almost just like, that's just sort of abusing the tactics of persuasion, more or less. Some of the points, though, that we kind of touched upon last time in our upload that we can really expand upon is, when I said Stefan Molyneux is someone who really talks about using analytics and data to talk about how he creates the show. He says this very openly, more openly than perhaps any YouTuber I've heard. And some recent things that I heard him talking about that kind of inspired this second part segment where he's saying, what you see on YouTube from his channel, Stefan Molyneux and Free Domain Radio, is just a fragment of what goes on. They sit behind the computer, they have data, spreadsheets, algorithms, the planning process, and this is when I said we would get into the kind of question and answer session. Somebody left a comment on my previous Stefan Molyneux upload, Genius or Fraud, saying, it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to look at what's popular and then talk about what's popular, to look at what's trending and then talk about what's trending. And a lot of people have given Stefan Molyneux a lot of flack for being very libertarian in the past, or even if he doesn't use the word libertarian-leaning, non-statist, anarcho-capitalist in the past. Then, going from the plan to end the state to endorsing Donald Trump, his critics simply say that's because the money was there and he'd get more of a following that way. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's an accusation. But, I think the person who left that comment, I don't have your name in front of me right now or else I'd give you a shout out, was simply saying that this was something that this guy is looking at what people want to hear and he's telling them what they want to hear. That's all he's doing, except they're doing it with computers as opposed to just guessing and getting lucky. Another comment that came in, though, on the first one, simply said that always remember that Stefan Molyneux has studied acting in the past. And I believe he actually has his master's degree in history, but he talks very clearly about being part of the university theater, being an actor in the past, and that also is something that ties into even perhaps some of the accusations that people have against him on the Wikipedia, trying to sound like he knows more about the subject than what he leads on, or only giving people a fragment of the information and then trying to pretend that this is all there is. There are many different sides to the issues. So, with the case of Stefan Molyneux, is he a genius or is he a fraud? I would say that this is a very tricky one, because obviously you're dealing with a very intelligent guy who knows how to persuade people, but a big thing with that is not so much that doesn't necessarily make you a fraud. When I was a lot younger, about 10 years ago, I always began to wonder, when someone is having like a tough time trying to get a message across to me, did they ever stop and think, how do I convey this message in a way that this person can understand? Like, did they ever think about that, or do they just want to start running their mouth until they can beat you down with submission? And there are a lot of tactics that people can go about that. There are a lot of ways that people can do that to kind of manipulate the situation using a variety of different tactics that I do hear about on Free Domain Radio. I mentioned one even on this channel called paralyzing the conversation, where you just ask a person questions and you don't pay attention to their answers, so then that person can just do whatever they want. In the long run, paralyzing the conversation. I would just think that when you want to talk about some of these things, you can genuinely see that Stefan Molyneux does try to get people out of abusive situations, more or less. And in that respect, he is not fraudulent. He does want to present his ideas in ways in which the internet viewers can understand. That, I don't believe, is fraudulent. But the problem is, though, is that going to go to such an extreme when he is going to start incorporating something that is inhumane into his analytics, or just going to view the data and see that if something in particular crosses the line into some sort of unethical and immoral territory, and just going to do that anyway because it will attract more views? That is when things start to become fraudulent. Has he ever done that in the past? Probably. I would say to get to that level of popularity, people like him just want to hear themselves talk. I would say that about countless broadcasters who are that famous. To get to a certain level of internet stardom and television stardom, I didn't even think about TV first. The internet is really taking off. You have to really care about being the person who gets to talk, and absolutely nothing to the contrary is acceptable. But I would genuinely stand by one of my original points that loading his books with filler so they appear larger than they actually are, that's not acceptable, especially when it's already online in the radio show and on YouTube, and you can already listen to it, and then you're just taking the transcript and saying, hey, I wrote a book. No, what you did was you wrote an essay, and then you kind of stapled some things together inside of it. But, and also, be very aware, though, of people who are giving away lots of free books. I was talking about this in the past, saying it's a good thing. This is a genuine persuasion tactic that people do when they want to try and get some new form of ideology or philosophy or political standpoint out there. They'll just have an enormous amount of books that you can get for free. This is not unheard of. And I, perhaps was a little bit naive to think that that was one thing you could do in the past. And another thing just to say is, sometimes people are very much focused on their own career, their own ambitions, and their own ability to persuade and their own ability to be heard. And they just want to be a voice that will be carried on out. So in the past, what I can say to summarize in the last minute is just that I thought Stefan Molyneux was trying to play Peter Pan. I think a little bit of that is true, but it turns out there are actually some much more serious things than I thought out there. But bear in mind, I don't believe that he is a complete fraud. I think instead that he is someone who tries to present his message in a way in which certain people will be very receptive of it, for the better or for the worse. If you have anything to say at all, please drop a comment below. Challenge me on this one. Throw out anything you'd like to say. I want to hear your challenges. I want to hear your questions and comments below, or read them rather than hear them. But I think you get the idea. Until next time.